Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to do a roundup of what I've been reading this week. And I should say, to kind of peek behind the curtains and sort of see what's happening, I'm recording this a little bit earlier in the week than I would normally. I know, Carl Surprise. It's more just because I am trying to, I'm going to be away for a few days, and instead of not having a weekly one and then having a fairly big weekly wrap up because I'm going to be dog sitting for a few days, not Annie this time, a different dog, that will mean that I'm hopefully going to be reading quite a lot. And I thought that might be quite an intense weekly roundup. So instead, I'm going to do a roundup of what I've been reading over the last 4 days or so. and we'll go from there. But I've been really enjoying the things I'm reading so far. There are a couple that I'm going to mention here that I'm almost at the end of. And I'll talk about what I've read of them so far as well, just to kind of wrap them up while we're here. Anyway, that's a lot of preamble. Let's get started. First, I just wanted to talk about something I'm currently reading. And this is Panic Response by John McCullough, and this is a collection of poetry that talks a lot about particularly sort of panic, as you might guess from the title, but particularly things around mental health and things like panic attacks, shock, surprise, how the body responds to those kind of stimuli, and also how that intersects with being someone who is queer. And so there are a few poems from what I've read so far where we, for example, see things like childhood memories and how the resurfacing of those can have certain impacts. We see a lot around the inner process of what it feels like to your body and mind when you are in the middle of something like a panic attack, but also just this sort of, I think it speaks quite a lot to kind of what is happening sort of globally and, sort of just really sort of generally in terms of there's a lot going on, particularly the last 2 years, where we've had a lot of things on our minds. We've been sort of a little bit higher alert than we maybe previously would have been. And this book, so far from what I've read, I'm about halfway through, looks a lot at that, and I've been really enjoying this so far. It's not an easy, comfortable read, but a really impressive, powerful one, I think, nonetheless. Something else that I'm partway through reading and really near the end, but thought I'd cover here, otherwise I'll forget it by the time I come around to talk about it again, is Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. And I don't think I've read any Franzen before. He's one of those authors who I keep on hearing about, particularly I think The Corrections, I think is his sort of big well-known one, and I'm enjoying what I'm reading so far. It took me a little bit to get into this so far, at the beginning, sorry, but I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through, maybe, or so. But essentially, a large part of this story is focused on a kind of a youth centre, but particularly a kind of religious youth group called the Crossroads. And it's one of those things where, do you know, sometimes where books have their titles mentioned in a book, and sometimes it's like a one-off thing, like, you know, it'll be a phrase like the final sentence of the book, or like the opening sentence of the book or something, or like it's an item in the book. With Crossroads, I feel like quite a few times they're like, what's that at Crossroads? And it's like, okay, I get it. This is the title of the book. I'm not quite sure which bit came first, whether Jonathan Franzen had decided it was going to be called Crossroads because of all of the possibilities that suggests as a metaphor, or whether it was just he noticed how often he was using the word crossroads and just thought, nah, go for it. It can be called Crossroads now. But essentially, we follow a lot of the kind of the sort of trials through this, and actually it kind of has quite an interesting overlap with history, like, because we're following a youth group over kind of a few years. We get things in here such as the Vietnam War, and particularly kind of conscription for young people at the time. And there's a recurring thing where we have a character who is very, very aware that in terms of the lottery for conscription, he has a chance to potentially be sent out into war, and he's absolutely terrified of this. So this kind of fear permeates the whole book, and there are quite a few decisions that seem to be made because of that. So either he doesn't do something because he could go and have to be at war any moment, or that he tries to fit everything in, and he sort of seems to alternate throughout his life. But there are some quite interesting set pieces, particularly around this youth group, this kind of Christian youth group, and the kinds of power dynamics of people sort of feeling aggrieved because they've suddenly realised that they're maybe not the right person for various things, and all of that kind of stuff. So really interesting book so far, and I'm kind of intrigued to see how the final third goes and what it does next from it. But keen to hear people's thoughts. I know that there have been a few people who have reviewed it and really loved it, and I need to go and check those out after I've read the book, including, I believe, Fraser, Simon's Everett Springboard Thought, and also Daniel Everett Guilty Feet. So I need to go and check both of those out. But that's where I'm up to so far with this book. And finally, 2 more books. A separate video would have gone out about this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart has just been released. At least it will be by the time of this video going out, and I loved it. Please do check out my separate video for my individual thoughts on it, because there's a lot I wanted to say about it, and even then, in the like 15 minutes or however long I spoke about it in that video, I didn't cover half of what I like my feelings about it. I absolutely loved this. I thought it was such a deep, profound book, so beautifully written, so beautifully conceived. Just this idea of these 2 boys sort of trying to keep their softness and keep their sense of love against this really violent backdrop, and I just thought it was really quite intense and suffocating as a book, but also deeply, deeply beautiful and incredibly funny at times. Like some really funny standout lines alongside some horrific things happening. But yeah, I really, really loved it. And last but not least, I read The Whale Tattoo by John Ransom, and I was reading this as part of a book group, and I think there were quite a few books that I started about a week ago and then was like, no, I'm gonna come back to this once I've had a little bit more sleep and feel a bit more rested, because I realised I was ignoring things and wasn't really getting into things. Young Mungo is one of them, The Whale Tattoo being the other, and this book largely focuses on a central character who in some ways is quite passive to a lot of life that's happening around him. He is sort of seemingly in and out of these sort of relationships with men, and I say relationships in a very loose sense. These almost feel like very transactional sexual relationships, and that's kind of it. There's some care, but not particularly great amount, and everybody's sort of trapped in this fairly, not hostile, that's not the right word, but this kind of environment where things are a little bit tricky and where there isn't much hope or much sense of escape. So Young Mungo is actually quite a similar book in some ways in that overall. I will say, I think the thing I struggled with a little bit in this book is I didn't find that there were many levels, as in it starts bleak and kind of continues being bleak throughout the whole book. I don't mind a good old bleak book. I really enjoyed A Little Life, and if enjoyed is the right word, but I think with A Little Life there's a little bit more of a sense of hope and sort of there are bits of humour, whereas I think in this book it is quite dark and bleak throughout, and I think in some ways that's this book's power, that it's not trying to be like everything's fine. Like it can all be overcome, isn't life fun and exciting? I think it kind of sits in that discomfort quite a lot. I will just say that sometimes made passages of this quite difficult to read, but at the same time, the writing of this I thought was glorious. I thought it was really well observed, really stark, and really, what's the word? It kind of pulls no punches. It sort of just says things. It's very blunt in its language at times, which I think is really cleverly done, particularly for what I believe is a debut. But yeah, interesting book nonetheless, and I'm kind of keen for more people to read it to kind of hear their thoughts on it as well, because there was a lot that I thought was really commendable and enjoyable about this book. I also just think it's quite a sad read in some ways, and so I kind of want to know if there are bits that I missed that were actually funny or a bit more uplifting. But yeah, intrigued to hear people's thoughts. Still, I mean, I realise it sounds like I'm bashing it. Still, overall, I think a good book. I just kind of think maybe I need a bit more time to sit on it after all of this. Anyway, so that's been me. I'm Bob, talking about some books. I'm about to go and disappear for a few days over the long weekend in the UK to go and dog sit a beautiful old dog who is adorable. And then I'll be back on my nonsense afterwards. But I'm hoping during all that time looking after this very sleepy dog that I will get through hopefully Books of Jacob and or one of the other big chunky bits from the International Booker, so either Tomb of Sand or the entire septology of good old Jon Fosse. Let's see. I've been Bob, talking about books. Take care and have a great week. Speak to you all soon. Bye bye.